Now, I was never a huge fan of the TV comedy Seinfeld when that was going on in the 90s, but the last episode of that sitcom sticks in my mind forever. Now, many people found this last episode pretty disappointing. It wasn't very funny, they said, for one thing, and it made moral judgments on the characters. So in this final episode, all of the regulars were together, Jerry and Elaine, George and Kramer, and they all received a 1-year jail sentence for failing to help someone who was robbed. Do any of you remember that one? What happens is Jerry's just received a contract with NBC to do a sitcom. And so the network is flying him, as well as 3 of his friends, Elaine, George, and Kramer, to Paris as a gift. On their way, though, their plane has some problems, and so they get stuck in the little town of Lakeland, Massachusetts. So they walk around, killing time in this quaint little New England town, and suddenly, right before their eyes, a carjacking takes place. Now, being the kind of people we viewers know them to be, the group stands there, and they talk about what's happening. And then they start to make fun of the guy being robbed. Kramer, who has a camcorder on his hands for some reason, films the whole incident out of curiosity. Then, there they are, 10 yards away from what's happening in front of them. And you know, they never once shout out or run over. They never lift a hand to help. They just stand there and casually watch. So then the robber speeds off in the car, and the police finally arrive late on the scene. And then the excitement's over, so Jerry suggests that they all go and get something to eat. But just as they're ready to walk away, one of the police officers walks up to them. "All right, hold it right there," he says. "What?" Jerry says. "You're under arrest," the officer says. "Under arrest? For what?" "Article 223-7 of the Lakeland County Penal Code," the officer says. "What?" Elaine chimes in. "Well, we didn't do anything." "That's exactly right," says the officer. "The law requires you to help or assist anyone in danger as long as it's reasonable to do so." "I never heard of that," George says. "It's new," the officer responds. "It's called the Good Samaritan Law. Let's go." And he takes him off to jail. That whole episode, it seems to me, is taken right out of today's Gospel of Luke. Right out. I wonder who the writer was. I need to check that out. It's subtle and comical in its own way. George says he'd never heard of it, but the truth is that law is as old as the tablets that Moses brought down from Mount Sinai. There's nothing new about it. The story of the Good Samaritan is really a parable about Hebrew law and how it's supposed to be understood. The story begins, as we heard it read so beautifully by our deacon today, as a lawyer stands up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he says, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Now, this is a question that even a first-year rabbinical student would know the answer to. But the lawyer asks it anyway. "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" And in true rabbinical fashion, Jesus responds to his question with a question of his own. Jesus says to him, "Well, what's written in the law? What do you read there?" And the lawyer responds with the correct passage from the Torah. "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And Jesus says to him, "You have given the right answer. Do this, and you will live. Do this, and you will live." The lawyer knew the law all too well, but he wanted to debate the law, not immediately to follow it. He wanted to find a loophole. And so he asks Jesus, "Well, who is my neighbor?" It always reminds me of several years ago, a friend of mine was talking about a sermon that he gave on the Good Samaritan. And to emphasize what he was trying to say, he called out, "Who is my neighbor? Who is my neighbor?" And the little boy on the side pew answered, "Mr. Rogers, Mr. Rogers." Fred Rogers of children's TV fame, yes, was a very good neighbor. And the lawyer's question to Jesus is just as relevant today as it was over 2,000 years ago. Who is our neighbor? We want to be good neighbors, but sometimes it's hard to figure out how to do that. We want to be good neighbors, but what does a neighbor, another person, really need from us to live a better life? We want to be good neighbors, but we fear if we try to help someone that we might be taken the wrong way, that we might get taken advantage of, that we might get hurt. Who is my neighbor? Well, Jesus answered the lawyer's question with one of the best known stories in the Bible, the story of the Good Samaritan. There was a man traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho, and on the way he's attacked by robbers, and they take his clothes and they beat him up, and they go off leaving him half dead. Luckily, a priest was on his way down the same road, but when he saw him, he angled around on the other side. And then a Levite religious man showed up, and he also avoided the injured man. And a Samaritan was traveling the same road and came upon him. And when he saw the man's condition, his heart went out to him. He gave him first aid. He disinfected and bandaged his wounds. He lifted him on his donkey and led him to an inn and made him comfortable. In the morning, he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper and said, "Take good care of them. If it costs any more, put it on my bill. I'll pay you on my way back." When he finished the story, Jesus turned the question back over to the lawyer. "What do you think? Which one of these 3 became a neighbor to the man attacked by robbers?" And he said, "The one who treated him kindly." And Jesus said, "Go and do likewise." It's a powerful story. It's also kind of disturbing. I don't think I'm the only one who's passed by someone who was in need and then thought of this old story that Jesus told. I've not always gone and done likewise, and for good reasons. I think, well, they'll just spend that money on booze or drugs, or it might be really dangerous to stop and help. That person looks pretty scary. Or, by heavens, I've got hospital calls to make. People are expecting me. I can't help out everyone. My resources are limited. But in the back of my brain, that story remains. When the priest and the Levite were coming back from Jerusalem, I imagine they were feeling good. They had just fulfilled all of their religious duties at the temple. All had gone well. And so when they saw this fellow Jew lying half dead on the road, they didn't feel anything but maybe annoyance. No love, no tug of duty, no compulsion to stop and help. They'd already done their bit in the temple. They passed on the other side, and suddenly the hollowness of their religious conviction was exposed. Like the Seinfeld characters, they were self-absorbed, focused on their own work, on their own life, on their own pleasure, on their own purity. And they tended to mock those who were different and ignore those who were in need. But not so that Samaritan. He saw a Jewish man who was an enemy to his people, lying half dead on the road, and he was moved with pity. In the depth of his compassion, he was compelled to action. He went to the man, bandaged his wounds, took care of him. He loved his neighbor, so different from himself. He did this exactly how he would want someone else to do it to him if he was in the same position. Jesus' commandment to love God and love our neighbor is at the very heart of our Christian faith. And love is at the center of so many other people of faith throughout the whole world of ours. Love of God and love of neighbor as yourself is, I truly believe, the only hope of transformation that we have in this self-absorbed, broken world that we live in. It's the kind of love that replaces accusation with forgiveness. It's the kind of love that ends war by waging peace. It's love that overcomes greed and the desire for power over others with selflessness and the huge desire to live together in harmony. It's that kind of love that we receive from our God. And it's that kind of love that we're striving to manifest here at Christ Church. In this circle of love, I am neighbor to you, and you are neighbor to me. Love a neighbor. Be a neighbor. And let's not complicate things by arguing over the specifics. We know what it means to do love because at some time or another, each one of us have been on the receiving end of it, and it's been so fabulous. Just knowing the right answer, that doesn't change a thing. If you want the world to look a little bit different the next time you go outside into it, do some love. Do some love. Do a little or do a lot. And don't forget to get some love for yourself too. This summer, let's let the sunlight of God's love pour upon us and soak the seeds of our right answers so that those answers blossom into right actions. And then just watch our landscape begin to change. We just do it, and we find out that when we do, we really do live, and live abundantly, just like the man said.